So one thing that was a little unique about the region that we were in that I didn't expect to encounter as much of was the wildlife. So we landed and began to make our drive up into the mountains. And along the way, we stopped at a cool little cafe. And I remember sitting off to the edge, and I was just looking out the window because we were like on a second floor, second story. And I saw this monkey begin to like climb up the building to the terrace and to like the balcony of one building. And then I whipped out my phone right away because I'm like, oh, my son, I have a 2-year-old son. He's going to love this. So I started videoing this monkey climb all the way up to the top and then just kind of disappear. I was so pumped. I sent it to Katie, and I was like, and she knew, like, my son was super excited. I didn't expect to see monkeys over there. Like, I had no clue. Well, little did I know that is not an uncommon, like, that's a very common occurrence. That you probably see them in that region of the world more than you see deer, more than you see squirrels here. I mean, like, they are everywhere. There's two kinds of monkeys. There's a gray monkey that's like kind of tall and lumbering and very and like pretty big. You're like, I would say almost the size of like an 8 or 9-year-old kid, like good sized monkey. And thankfully they're pretty chill, like they're pretty relaxed. You like mind your business, they mind their own business, and you're good to go. And then there's these little monkeys, and they're like the size of toddlers. They're called brown monkeys, and you know, imagine like 20, 30 pounds, but they are just wild. You cannot make eye contact with them. You cannot carry things in your hand because they'll take things right out of your hand. I mean, they'll lose their mind. They'll go bananas on you, okay? And so, that's a bad joke. And so I was just surprised at the amount of encounters our team had while we were there with monkeys. At one point, monkeys got into the girls' bedroom, right? They opened up the window, and monkeys, like 2 or 3, came like wandering through, and you had to scare them off and shout and scream and get them out. There was another point where Evelyn was walking hand in hand up in this like upper part of the region of the city we were in, and walking hand in hand with somebody. And while she was walking, a little brown monkey ran up, saw her free hand, which had a water ball in it, snatched it out of her hands, ran off to the side, began to gnaw on the lid, tried to open it up, couldn't do it, and then just chucked it down the side of the mountain. So these monkeys just like have a way of intensifying situations. And so there was one day where it was like, it was kind of the icing on the cake. We were in the city that Whitley was describing, and we were walking, we had seen one statue, we were walking around, going to this place of worship where all the thousands of people were at. And we were walking single file because we were crossing a bridge, and there actually happened to be a sidewalk there. There's not many sidewalks in that region of the world. But it was narrow, so we had to walk single file, and I think it was maybe third or fourth in line, and our host was up front, and right in front of me was JJ. And he was right in front of me, we were walking along, and he was just minding his business. I think he might have had an AirPod in of some kind, might listen to music, but we were doing a lot of walking, and he was minding his own business, and all of a sudden we were walking, and on the left, on the railing were 2 brown monkeys, and one was perched up on the top railing of this bridge. And JJ did the unthinkable. He looked at the monkey, okay? He looked at the monkey, they made eye contact, and there's words that I want to say that I won't say aloud. But it began to lose its mind, okay? I watched, and in front of me is the face of this monkey, its mouth began to open up, it began to bare its teeth, and scream and yell and lunge towards JJ, and he pulled on his shirt a few times. And JJ, being the cool-headed guy that he is, all he did is kind of tug his shirt and then look back and go, "What are you doing?" And then keep on walking. And that was it. That was the end of the encounter. I thought maybe that we were going to have to go to the hospital and get like rabies shots or something, because the go-to question you ask when you're there is, "Have you ever gotten in a fight with a monkey?" And many people have. So JJ survived his fight with the monkey, and you guys can ask about his strategies and how he's able to stay that cool. But like that experience, right? Like that encounter with the monkey really ramped up this entire experience of that day in that specific city. It like everything that Whitley said was extraordinarily true. It was a heavy place. We had been staying up in the mountains, and so this city was down on the river plain, and it was hot down there. It was humid down there. There was way more smog down there. So the sun was beginning to set, and you looked in the sky, and it was like this like fiery red. I mean, and like there was just a haze over everything. And you look at the river, and it's super dirty. There's trash that lines the bottom of the river, and the experience is just so overstimulating because for a while we were next to a road, and there was cars going back and forth, and they don't really pay attention to traffic laws there. And then you walk into the crowds, and there's these money changers, these vendors, like Whitley was saying, And they're there really just to take advantage of the pilgrims, and they're trying to make money off of these pilgrims. These people are going there from all over the country to worship. And then you finally get to the place of worship itself, and there are just thousands of people. And actually, they say if you stay for the evening worship services, there's over 100,000 people that gather in that place. I mean, we left before that happened. But it was crazy. People everywhere of all kinds and shapes and colors, and there were people that were sick and had deformities. And then as a Westerner, you just stand out. I mean, they know, hey, this person's probably not supposed to be here. And then as a follower of Jesus, right, I'm here sitting under literally the shadow of a 50-foot idol. And I'm walking amongst these people who do not worship the same God that I do. And so not only am I a Westerner, out of place, I'm in an environment that's uncomfortable, but as a follower of Jesus, I just felt, I didn't feel right. There was an unsettling in my heart. And I remember as I was walking through, I was like, Lord, what do you want to do? What are you saying? Because we're here to pray for these people. And I want to see these people come to know Jesus, but there is so many of them. There are so many of them. And we're situated in the heart of a country that has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of people in it. And there's hundreds of millions of people. This is just a tiny little fraction of the amount of people that are caught up in this kind of worship. We're not even allowed. We're going to get in trouble if we stand up on a box and we need to share the gospel. The ministry in the way that I expected it to be didn't look like the way I wanted it to be there. It was limited. The environment was intense. And so what are we supposed to do? And as I was praying, I didn't even know where to start to pray. And then I felt like the Lord dropped this phrase in my mind, which this phrase is referring to a verse that I want us to look at tonight. But I felt like I heard the Lord saying, I am the seed that died for them and will produce the harvest. I am the seed that will die for them and will produce the harvest. And what I felt like the Lord was saying to me comes directly from Scripture. This is John chapter 12, verse 24. And it's the only solution. Jesus is the only solution for these people. He's the only solution for this nation. And I want us to take a look at this verse tonight. Because not only is it important for the people that live there, but it's important for us here. So we're going to go to John chapter 12. We're going to start in verse 20. But the context here is Jesus, this is kind of his heyday of his ministry. Lazarus has been just raised from the dead, which was a big deal because for the Jews to see someone raised from the dead was a confirming sign of the Messiah. So there was this buzz about Jesus. This is really close to the time in John 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. That's the night before he's actually betrayed and then sent to the cross and to die. So it's right before that. And so this is on the eve of his the peak of his ministry. And so we pick up this story in John chapter 12, verse 20. And we're going to go through line by line and really break this down because as I've spent more, as the Lord brought me to the Scripture and then I spent more time studying it, it just became alive. And it's crazy. It's so good. So it says this in verse 20. Some Greeks who had come to Jerusalem for the Passover celebration paid a visit to Philip, who is from Bethsaida in Galilee. And they said, Sir, we want to meet Jesus. Philip told Andrew about it, and they went together to ask Jesus. Verse 23, Jesus replied, Now the time has come for the Son of Man to enter his glory. I tell you, and this is where the reference comes from, I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat is planted in the soil and dies, it remains alone. But its death will produce new kernels, a plentiful harvest of new lives. Now, if you were on the trip with me, or if you were hanging out with me on Sunday, you've heard this phrase, you've heard this verse before. I shared this with you guys. But there's a lot of meaning here. First, I want to ask the question, who came to Jesus? Who came wanting to see Jesus? And the phrase that's used describing these people looking for Jesus is Greeks. So there's a little bit of debate, if you kind of dig into it, about exactly who these people are. But I think that it's very intentional that Scripture uses the word Greeks. Right? So these people are non-Jews. They're Gentiles. Unless one of you have a really cool Jewish story, Jewish ancestry, that's all of us, right? We are in this camp with the Greeks. And they come to Philip, and Philip has a way of bringing people to Jesus. That's kind of his what he does. He ends up becoming a really cool evangelist. And they come to Philip, and there must have been some sort of connection prior to this because it says he's from Bethsaida. And they come to Philip, and they say, hey, we want to meet this Jesus. And we know, because of the time period of this in Jesus' ministry, there's a buzz. And even people that aren't Jews that aren't God's chosen people really have begun to have a desire to see Jesus. And so the disciples, Philip and Andrew, they talk about it and they're like, okay, let's go talk to Jesus and see if he wants to hang out with these Greeks. Because this was not what Jesus originally came for. The primary purpose of Jesus was not for the Greeks. It was for the Jews. It was for God's chosen people. And so, it makes sense that they would go ask Jesus for what he wanted to do. And so his reply is super interesting. Because it's almost like he's talking right past them. But if you dig into it a little more, you see that he's actually responding right to him. Jesus says, now the time has come for the Son of Man to enter into his glory. Now there's two things here that Jesus is alluding to. First is that Jesus is about to die on the cross. And then he's going to resurrect from the dead. And he's going to experience, glory from God. He's going to experience honor. People are going to be able to worship him. They're going to see this miracle. And all this amazing things about to happen. But also what's to come after Jesus' resurrection. Right? Jesus' purpose for the Jews is fulfilled, not ultimately fulfilled, but his original mission for the Jews is done. And he begins to crack open the message of the gospel and the invitation to the kingdom of heaven to who? The Greeks. To the non-Jews. To the rest of the world. And they're going to give him glory too. The Son of Man is about to enter into glory because he's going to resurrect from the dead, but he's also going to get glory because the message of the gospel, the good news of the kingdom, is going to be cracked open for the entire world. And this is important because you and I, we being non-Jews, we being Gentiles, the people in that city that Whitley was describing and the region that we went to, that country, we are all like those Greeks. We're people that are far off. We're people that weren't originally part of God's original intention when he set up the covenants in the Old Testament. We weren't the first choice. Yet, God opened up in his mercy and in his kindness, opened up the plan of redemption for every single person. And that's true for you and I. That's true for every person that's on this campus, every person that lives in the city of Ames. Jesus is beginning to open up. And now, living on the other side of the cross, right, we know he has entirely opened up the experience to know God to every single person, Jews and Greeks alike. To people that live in Southern Asia and the people that live in Ames, Iowa. And then all of a sudden, Jesus pivots and starts talking about farming. He starts to talk about farming. And, we, being Central Iowans, we have some familiarity with farming, hopefully. Emery does because he's an ag studies major. But he begins to talk about specifically wheat farming, which we don't really grow wheat here. We all know we grow corn and soybeans. And so what he's talking about, though, is the principle is still the same. He begins to talk about wheat farming. And he says, what we would all hopefully intuitively know, if you don't know, today's a great way to learn because this is nothing new, but I'm going to tell you. He says, I tell you the truth, right? Verily, verily, or truly, truly, right? That's what Jesus is saying. And so he basically means, listen up, I'm about to say something important. And he goes, I'm going to make sure I say this correctly. He says, I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat, unless a seed of wheat, right? And it's a seed, is planted in the soil and dies, it remains alone. But its death will produce a harvest, a plentiful harvest in your lives. So Jesus begins to talk about farming. Now again, he's alluding to something. He's talking in what we call a parable or a metaphor. He begins to unveil spiritual truth in this metaphor. And the first thing he's talking about is that he himself is the seed. Jesus is the seed, right? He's choosing to take his life like a seed and plant it into the earth. What happens, right? Jesus goes to the cross and he dies a physical death, and then he's buried in the earth for 3 days. He's dead and he's buried, and there he remains for 3 days. Now, hopefully, if you're in this room tonight, you've heard the rest of the story, right? After 3 days, Jesus comes back from the grave. The stone is rolled away that was sealing up the tomb, and through the power of God, he's resurrected. He comes back to life. And what happens? A plentiful harvest of new life comes. And the story isn't just for the Jews. It's not just for the people that live in Jerusalem. It's not for the people that live in the Middle East. It's for the people that were in the city that we were in. It's for the people in Southern Asia. It's for the people in the United States and in Europe and in Ames, Iowa, and at Iowa State University. Jesus' life, he chooses to lay down to become the seed that produces a plentiful harvest. It produces a harvest of life in you and I. Right? If Jesus didn't go into that grave and then defeat sin, hell, in the grave, you and I would not have life. That's just the truth, right? It's through his resurrection that we now have life. It's because he chose to lay down his life as a seed. So this is good, right? This is the gospel. This is the good news of Jesus. If you've never heard it before, I would encourage you to turn to Jesus tonight because he was the seed. He laid down his life for you so that you could have new life. His seed, right, his life became the seed so that the things that you're caught up in, the things that I was bound in for a long time, addictions, hopelessness, loneliness, we could be set free from and we could enter into a relationship with God and be freed of all of those things. Jesus was the seed that allowed us to experience that. His life was the payment that allowed us to receive that. And that's for everyone. And then verse 25 comes. And we realize that verse 24 is actually, there's a double meaning. In verse 25, the subject of who he's talking to and what he's talking about begins to change. He moves his comments forward. He says this. I'm going to read 24 through 26. It says, I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat is planted in the soil and dies, it remains alone. But its death will produce many new kernels, a plentiful harvest of new lives. And then he starts talking towards us. Those who love their life in this world will lose it. Those who care nothing for this life in this world will keep it for eternity. Anyone who wants to serve me must follow me, because my servants must be where I am. And the Father will honor anyone who serves me. So he begins to turn the whole conversation. I mean, Jesus really covered a lot of ground in this little exchange. He turns the conversations towards his disciples and towards us. And he says, hey, if you love your life in this world, you're going to lose it. If you love your life in this world, you're going to lose it. But if you choose to set down the things that you love about this world, if you choose to set down the things in your life that you love, and to follow me, then you'll find eternal life. Then and only then. And then he says, which I've read past so many times, and as I studied this more, I was like, wow, it's right here. Anyone who wants to serve me must follow me, because my servants must be where I am. Well, guess where Jesus is going? Guess where he's going? He's going to the cross. He's carrying the cross on his back. He's going up to Calvary's Hill, to the Mount Golgotha, and there he's going to die a physical death and then be buried in the ground for 3 days. And Jesus says, my followers must be where I am. There's a lot of meaning that is being shed from verse 26 that you can look back on verse 24 and see the new life. Because if we want to follow Jesus, we must be where he is, and so we must follow him to the cross, right? We must allow our lives to be laid down and to go in the tomb with him. That's why Galatians 2 says, I've been crucified with Christ. That's what it says. There is a spiritual death that happens when we give our lives to Jesus. And then it says, I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who lives, but he lives in me, right? So that's the good news of what happens next, right? We receive new spirit. There's this amazing gift of salvation. We get new life. When we lay down our life through letting ourselves die with Christ, our old lives die with Christ, choosing to not love this world, but to love him more, that's actually when we experience new life because he gives us new spirit. He gives us Holy Spirit, right? That's a big deal. And then we look back at verse 24. And before I go on, this is the good news of us, right? This is the good news of what Jesus has done for us. When we look at verse 24, it says that he'll produce a harvest, like the kernel we will fall to the ground, produce a harvest of new life. The new life that's come inside of us is, I know it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. That is the new life, right? That is the new harvest that's to come. But then notice what he says in the middle of it. He says, and it will produce a harvest of new kernels. And what do you think those kernels are meant for? They're meant to undergo the same process that the first kernel did. To be cast into the ground, to be buried, and to die, to produce a new harvest. The analogy here, right, I'll just say it plainly, make it plain, is that we are called to be that second generation of kernels, that cyclical nature of kernels. That as we follow Jesus to the grave, we actually allow our lives to be like kernels, that are like kernels of wheat that are planted in the soil to produce a new harvest. But here's the thing, if we don't lay our life down, it says it will remain alone. It says the kernel wheat will remain alone. So when we give our lives to Jesus, I want to make this very clear, right? We get new life. And I don't think there's anything really, well, there isn't anything Like there's nothing that can pluck that from you, right? There's nothing that no one can take that from you. That is the work of God in you. But here's the thing. If you don't choose to lay down the rest of your life, that work of God in you, it's going to die with you. It's just going to remain alone. And so the question I have for us tonight is, are we following the example of verse 24? Are we allowing our lives to be like kernels of wheat cast into the ground to die and to produce a new harvest? Are we planting our lives? Or do we love our lives too much? Do we love our video games too much to give our time to God and to other people? Do we love our money too much to be generous and to go out of our way to meet people's needs? Do we love our dignity and comfort too much to take risks in sharing Jesus with somebody? Do we love our phones too much to look up and meet someone new for the first time? Do we love our priorities and our goals and our agendas too much to prioritize what and who is on God's heart? Do we love our friend circles too much? And are we too cozy in those little circles that we make to invite someone new in? If we love our lives too much, and if we refuse to follow Jesus to the cross, we will be a kernel of wheat, and it will remain alone. And the work of God will die in us. And here's the thing. If you're in this room tonight, someone has chosen to let their own lives be a kernel of wheat so the work of God could come in your life. Now, for many of you, you're like, well, how is that possible? I was raised in a Christian home. Man, your parents? You think they love you? Do you think they ever chose to be inconvenienced by you, to take time out of their day, to explain things to you if you came from a good home, right? If you came from a Christian home? Their lives were like kernels of wheat cast into the earth. There was a death, trust me, there was a death that they experienced raising you, as amazing as you are. If you didn't grow up in a good home and you're here and you didn't come from a Christian home, there was someone that took a risk for you. There was someone that was willing to look like an idiot to invite you here tonight. There was someone that was willing to lay their dignity down and what they thought was cool and what they thought was important. They decided to set those things down so that you could have a chance to experience the work of God. Their lives, they chose to lay their lives down as a kernel of wheat. And what's awesome is if you're here tonight, there's a work of God happening in you, and their life being laid down is already beginning to bear fruit in you. And the question is are you going to let the work of God die in you and cut that tree off? Friends, a lot of people have allowed the work of God to die with them. But why else is our world not reached? Why else doesn't Iowa State University already all know Jesus? Obviously there's going to be people that reject him, but man, there's a lot of people that just never heard of him. We've allowed the work of God to die with us. And so are we going to plant our lives? Are we going to plant our lives? There's an amazing story from a young couple they graduated from a college just outside of Chicago. This was the early 1950s. They both came from very high-caliber families, ministry-oriented families, very well, not super wealthy, but pretty well-to-do families. And they were articulate, they were talented, and they decided in their young marriage that they were going to give their lives up so that other people could meet Jesus. And so in the early 1950s, they left what would have been a potential very good ministry career in the United States, a very good professional career here, and they went to the jungles of Ecuador. And there, for several years, they learned to, and their intention was to actually translate the Bible into the language of one of the native tribes in the Amazon jungle. And so for a few years there, they sat under teaching of people that had been there longer than them to learn how to do this process. And while they were in the jungles of Ecuador, they heard about another tribe that was nearby. And I'm not going to say their name because I'm going to butcher the tribe name. So I want to respect them, and I'm just not going to say their name. But there was a tribe nearby, but the thing about this tribe is they were known to be a little more hostile. They didn't really like outsiders. They were known to be pretty violent in their nature. And so while this young couple, their names were Jim and Elizabeth Elliott, while they were sitting there working with this other tribe, their hearts began to burn for what God was going to do. That, hey, Jesus really wants to meet these people. And so Jim and his friends and other people that were there working with them, the men, they began to take their plane and fly over the region where this tribe lived. And they began to drop presents and gifts over the side of the plane in baskets as a demonstration of goodwill towards these people. And they did their best to begin to establish kind of this like far off distance relationship with them. And eventually, one day, they decided to land the plane. They landed a plane nearby. They began to build a base through which they knew they were going to eventually reach and make contact with these people. While they're building the base, they actually encountered one of these people. It was a good encounter. They actually took up one of these. I mean, imagine you're like you live in the Amazonian jungle and you don't have electricity, and then they took him up in a plane. They actually called him George because they didn't know his native name. And so they took George in this plane and flew around. And they landed him back down, and they began to establish a relationship, gave him more gifts, and they went back home. They resupplied. And they decided, hey, we're going to go back. We're going to make a really big push. Like, this is the time we're going to make contact with this tribe. And they landed, and when they landed, they made a radio call to their wives back home in the other base. And they said, hey, this is the day. We think we're going to make contact. And so they began to make their way towards where these people are at with gifts and presents, trying to demonstrate goodwill. And they began to cross the river on the other side of which this tribe lived. And on the other side, or while they were walking towards the other side, instead of being met with smiles and handshakes and hugs, they were met with 10 warriors. And very quickly after, spears were in their chests, and a few days later, their bodies were found downstream, and all 5 men died, leaving wives and young children behind. And so here Elizabeth Elliot is, her husband Jim had just died. She's a 10-month-old kid, living, there's people around her, but by herself in the Amazonian jungle without a husband. Freshly widowed with a 10-month-old child. And so what does she do? She chooses to stay. And a few weeks later, a woman from that tribe that had just killed her husband actually was able to somehow make her way to the camp that Elizabeth was living in. And she established a relationship with Elizabeth. And over the course of a few years, Elizabeth began to learn the language, that native language of that tribe, from this woman. And eventually that woman left to go back and begin to prepare the way for these outsiders to come. And so a little bit later, Elizabeth took her now toddler daughter and moved into the village to the tribe that had killed her husband just a few years earlier. And there she labored for years. And she saw almost the entirety of this tribe come to know Jesus. Her husband's life was a kernel of wheat that he chose to lay down and cast in earth and die, so there could be a harvest, a plentiful harvest in your life. Are we planting our lives too? Now, I'm not saying you're going to get a spear in your chest named Zion, okay? It's probably not going to happen here. More than likely, if anyone's got a spear, run, okay? No, I don't know about that. They're weird. But you guys live under a rich history of people and students, of Chi Alpha students, that have chosen to lay down their lives as kernels of wheat on this campus. I can think of my own small group leader my freshman year. He decided at the end of my freshman year, going into what was his last semester, he was graduating in fall semester, he decided to do the unthinkable. In his 5th year, this last semester, he decided to not re-sign his contract with his roommates and some of his best friends. He decided to sign a Department of Residence contract with me in Maple 308 and live with us dirty, rotten freshmen and sophomores. And he moved from off campus into Maple 308. Have you guys been in Maple? He chose to move into Maple so that there could be an opportunity that he could have to meet people and introduce them to Jesus. That same year, he actually he actually took on a symphony class, I think it was a symphony class. Just he picked it up because he played an instrument and decided, hey, I want to pick up this class just so I can meet people. And you know what? There was fruit from that. People actually got invited in a community to encounter Jesus because of what he did. He decided that he didn't want his time here to be wasted. And he wanted to lay down his life as a kernel of wheat so that people could experience the harvest of new life. I had a friend also in college who was a wrestler. He was pretty darn good, but not good enough to start. And he knew that going in. He walked onto the wrestling team here, and he knew he would never play. But for 4 years, he was faithful to the team because he knew that there was people on that team that didn't know Jesus. And so he spent 4 years at practice, working his tail off, and he never once wrestled in a meet. But he did it so that other people could be exposed to who Jesus is and experience the gospel for themselves. And another friend who, he as an agricultural engineer, decided that he wasn't going to get an internship one summer. That instead, he was going to give up his summer to go work a very low-paying job at a camp in Iowa with high-risk children to just love them and share the gospel with them. There are countless and countless students that are highly intelligent, very capable, high capacity, overworked, overburdened, have lots on their mind, but they chose to spend so much time leading small groups, staying up late at night, praying with people, crying with people, giving their lives to people so other people can experience Jesus. You have a rich history and rich heritage that you walk in. And the question that I want to pose for you, and this is the question that I felt like the Lord was asking me, is, are we going to draw a line in the sand and choose to allow our lives to be planted like kernels of wheat to produce a harvest of new lives? Or do we love our lives too much? Are we content with the way things are? Because if we don't choose to plant our lives like kernels of wheat, the work of God will die with us. It will not reproduce, and it will not replicate. I want us to pray. I wish you could come on up.
Thank you for joining Chi Alpha at Iowa State University this week, where we seek to encounter God and grow with each other. For more information about who we are, follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Chi Alpha ISU.